Praise the Lord. This is Brother Parrott again. This is October the 12th, year 2000. The day is Thursday, and we're endeavoring to come to you today with the divided kingdom stage and some of the prophets that prophesied during this stage. And we're right in the middle of the great prophet Isaiah. And we're in the actual prophecies concerning our Lord Jesus Christ. We're at the point of His resurrection, His ascension, and His exaltation. Isaiah 52 verse 13, Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. The word prudent here means to prosper, to be successful. See Joshua 1 verse 7 and 8, Jeremiah 23 verse 5, where the same Hebrew word occurs in what a success story we have here in this verse. Note the predicted threefold accomplishments of God's servant. He would be exalted, literally to be high. This is a reference to His resurrection in Matthew 28 verse 1 through 10. He would be extolled, meaning to be lifted up. This is a reference to His ascension. See Acts chapter 1, verse 9 and verse 10. He would be very high or greatly exalted. This is a reference to His exaltation. Philippians 2, verse 5 through 11. All this is even more significant because of what follows in Isaiah 53. For here we see the servant of the Lord resurrected, ascended, and exalted even before He was crucified. Who but God Himself could possess that kind of glorious confidence? Isaiah chapter 53, verse 10b through 12, and also chapter 52, verse 15. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Isaiah 53, verse 10b through 12. So shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him. For that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. Isaiah 52, verse 15. These final verses give us a grand summary of both the suffering and the ultimate satisfaction of Jehovah's servant. Doubtless Peter had this in mind when he wrote, of which salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify, when it testified beforehand the suffering of Christ and the glory that should follow, in 1 Peter 1, verse 10 and 11. The suffering of God's servant. He poured out his soul unto death as a trespass offering unto God. See St. John chapter 10, verse 11, 15, and verse 18. He was counted as a common criminal. In spite of this, he bore the sins of the world and prayed for the tormentors. Hebrews 2, verse 9, Luke 23, verse 34. The satisfaction of God's servant. He shall see the spiritual children he died to save. Compare Hebrews 12, verse 1 and 2 with Jude 1, verse 24. He would fulfill the will and pleasure of his Father. He will receive from his Father the spoils of victory. See Revelation chapter 11, verse 15, where the scripture states, and when the seventh angel sounded, the angel of the Lord said, the kingdoms of our Lord are become the kingdoms of the world are become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. He will be supreme source of blessing to many nations. Revelation chapter 21, verse 22 through 26. He will enjoy this satisfaction throughout all eternity. Revelation 1, verse 8, 1 Peter 1, verse 1 and verse 2, and Hebrews 10, verse 22. His millennial reign. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 7. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 4 through 7. Isaiah chapter 59, verse 16 through 21. These verses describe God's search for a man and his choice of Christ as the only acceptable Redeemer. Isaiah here depicts a sight later described by the Apostle John in Revelation chapter 5, verse 1 through 14. Paul informs us that the armor pieces worn by this warrior Redeemer are now available to all the redeemed warriors. See chapter 6, verse 13 through verse 17 of the book of Ephesians, where it speaks of taking on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand in the evil day. And Revelation chapter 5, verse 1 through 14 speaks of the great throne of God and the Lamb that was slain in the midst of the throne, and the 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. This Lamb came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne, and then he begins opening the seals in chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 3 through 5. And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. Isaiah 49, verse 1 through 12, and Isaiah 32, verse 1. Behold, a king shall reign in righteousness, and princes shall rule in judgment. Isaiah 32, verse 22. For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us. The sins of Israel, her stupidity. She did not even have the common sense of a brute animal. Chapter 1, verse 3 of Isaiah. God had to tell them everything over and over again, line upon line, here a little and there a little, and still they could not understand. Isaiah 28, verse 9 through 13. Her hypocrisy. God was sick of their sacrifices, which were offered without any sorrow for sins. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 11 through 14. Because of this, he would refuse to see their outstretched hands or hear their pious words during prayer time. Isaiah 1, verse 15. Israel's worship services amounted to mere words learned by rote memory. Isaiah 29, verse 13. Her women, chapter 3, verse 16 through 26. Before God judged them, chapter 3, verse 16 through 23. They were haughty with their noses in the air. They had wanton eyes. They wore ornaments about their feet and chains about their ankles. They had necklaces and bracelets. They had veils of shimmering gauze. They wore headbands. They wore nose jewels and earrings. They sported party clothes, negligees and capes. They wore ornate combs and carried purses. How far removed all this was from Peter's description of the real beauty and adornment of a woman in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1 through 4. After God judged them, Isaiah 3, verse 24 through 26, Israel, instead of the sweet fragrance, there would be rottenness. Instead of a girdle or a sash, a rope. Instead of a well-set hair, baldness. Instead of beauty, shame, disgrace, and widowhood. Her fruitlessness, Isaiah 5, verse 1 through 7. The parable of the Lord's vineyard. The parable employs one of the two figures taken from the botanical world to represent the nation of Israel. The other is a fig tree. See Matthew 21, verse 33 through 46. What God did for his vineyard. Isaiah 5, verse 1 and 2. He planted it on a very fertile hill with the choicest vine. He plowed it and took out all the rocks. He built a watchtower and cut a winepress in the rocks. He waited patiently for the harvest. What God received from his vineyard, nothing but wild and sour grapes. Isaiah 5, verse 2. What God would do to his vineyard. Isaiah 5, verse 3 through 7. He would tear down the fences and let the vineyards go to pasture to be trampled by cattle and sheep. He would not prune nor hoe it, but let it be overgrown with briars and thorns. He would even command the clouds not to rain on it anymore. Her 6-count indictment, Isaiah 5, verse 8 through 22. She denied others their own property rights. She had become a nation of drunkards. See Isaiah 28, verse 1 through 8. She had mocked God and dared him to punish her. She had called right wrong and wrong right. Her black was white, her white was black, her bitter was sweet, and her sweet was bitter. Here is a classic example of today's new morality practiced by Israel some 7 centuries BC. She was wise and shrewd in her own eyes. She took bribes, which resulted in freeing the guilty and imprisoning the innocent. Her false leaders, Isaiah 9, verse 15 and verse 16. The ancient and honorable, he is the head, and the prophet that teaches lies, he is the tail. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led of them are destroyed. Isaiah 24, verse 14 and verse 15. Wherefore hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men, that rule this people which is in Jerusalem, because ye have said, we have a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through it shall not come unto us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. Her dependence upon Egypt, Isaiah chapter 30, verse 1 through 7, chapter 31, verse 1 through 3. Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses flesh, and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is hoping shall fall down, and they shall all fall together. And that's Isaiah 31, verse 1 and verse 3. Her tragic overall condition, Isaiah 1, verse 5 and verse 6. Why should ye be stricken any more? You will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even unto the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. Isaiah 59, verse 1 through 8. And then Isaiah chapter 64, verse 6. But we all as an unclean thing, all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are as filthy rags, and we do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind have taken us away. Isaiah 65, verse 2 and verse 3. I have spread out my hands all the day unto a rebellious people which walketh in a way that was not good, after their own thoughts. A people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face, that sacrificeth in gardens, and burneth incense upon altars of brick. The Gentile nations, Babylon, Isaiah 13 through 14, and Isaiah chapter 21. The New Scofield Bible notes the following. This prophecy concerning Babylon announces the doom of the nation and city at the hands of the Medes, Isaiah 13, verse 17 through 22, but applies the word Babylon to the totality of Gentile world powers, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 2, verse 31, verse 32, verse 37 and 38, and culminating in the fourth world empire at the return of Jesus Christ to the earth as a smiting stone, Daniel 2, verse 34 and 35, and then verse 40 through 45. This is the time of the Gentiles, Luke 21, verse 24. Babylon was to be destroyed by the Medes, Isaiah 13, verse 17 through 22. Their armies would be chased back to their own land as a wild dog would pursue a frightened deer, Isaiah 13, verse 14. Their soldiers would be butchered, their children murdered, and their wives raped, Isaiah 13, verse 15 and 16. The prophet Isaiah is horrified and becomes physically ill at God's description of Babylon's punishment, Isaiah 21, verse 3 through 5. The last passage was no doubt fulfilled to a T when Darius took Babylon. See Daniel chapter 5. This all reads as if it were an eyewitness account of the destruction as recorded by Daniel. Yet Isaiah wrote about this some 200 years before it actually transpired. See Jeremiah 51, verse 8 and 9. Isaiah also vividly describes the watchman as he brings word to the king that the city had fallen. See Isaiah 21 verse 6 through 10 and Jeremiah 51 verse 31 through 33. Babylon was to become a desolate land of porcupines and swamps. Isaiah 14 verse 23. The wild animals would make it their home and demons would come there to dance. Isaiah 13 verse 21. Babylon was never to be built on that site. Here it would be pointed out that some believe the ultimate fulfillment of these verses must await the tribulation period when ancient Babylon will be rebuilt on the Euphrates. See Revelation chapter 18. This is advocated because some of the prophecies concerning Babylon's destruction were not all fulfilled when the city fell to the Medes. See Jeremiah 25 verse 17 through 26 and then chapter 51 verse 26. The rulers of two Gentile nations are used by God as a basis of describing the person and ministry of Satan. One is Tyre, Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 1 through 19, and the other is Babylon in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12 through 16. For other examples of this addressing Satan through another, see the following. Genesis 3:15, where Satan is addressed through the serpent. Matthew 16 verse 22 and 23, where Satan is addressed through Simon Peter. Assyria, chapter 14, verse 24 through 27. God had determined to crush the Assyrian army on the mountains of Israel, 14 verse 25. This would be done to remove the awful Assyrian yoke from his people. Philistia, 14 verse 28 through 32. Philistia was warned not to rejoice over the death of King Ahaz of Judah, who had smote them while alive. 14 verse 29. His son Hezekiah would be even more demanding. 14 verse 29. Finally, Philistia was to suffer total doom under the cruel attack of Sargon, the Assyrian king. Moab, chapter 15 and chapter 16. Moab was a nation which came from Lot through the incestuous relationship with his elder daughter. The illegitimate son of this sordid affair was the father of the Moabites. Their people became the persistent enemies of the nation Israel. Balak, their king, hired Balaam the prophet to curse them, but Ruth also came from this land. See Numbers 22 verse 2 through 4 and Ruth chapter 1 verse 4. Moab was to be punished by God, with its chief cities destroyed in one night. Isaiah 15 verse 1. The whole land would be filled with weeping from one end to another. Isaiah 15 verse 8. Lions would hunt down the survivors. 15 verse 9. Moab's refugees were invited by God to avail themselves of his mercies. They were enjoined to pay tribute to Israel according to their past arrangement. 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 4 through 9 and Isaiah chapter 16 verse 1. However, pride kept Moab from doing this. Chapter 16 verse 6. Isaiah wept because of God's judgment upon this stubborn pride. 16 verse 11. His judgment was officially set to fall within 3 years. The Assyrians at that time invaded Moab. 16 verse 14. Damascus, chapter 17. Damascus was the capital of Syria and is the oldest living city in the world today. Ephraim, another title for the Israelite northern kingdom, and Damascus had allied together against Judah, thus linking that kingdom with the divine judgment. Partners in crime meant partners in punishment. Isaiah 17 verse 3. Both allies were later besieged by Tiglath-Pileser, 2 Kings 15 verse 29, and were finally deported by Shalmaneser, 2 Kings 17 verse 6. Ethiopia, chapter 18. This land shadowing with wings is thought to be African Ethiopia, 18 verse 1. Missionaries to that land tell us that it is known as the land of birds, and it is called the land of wings. This nation marches against Israel historically or prophetically, but it is cut off by God himself. Their army will be left dead on the field for the birds and the animals to eat. Isaiah 18 verse 4 through 6. After this, the tribulation, Ethiopia will bring gifts to the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem. 18 verse 7. Egypt, chapter 19 and chapter 20. No nation is so prominent in the Bible as Egypt. It is first mentioned when Abraham visited there in Genesis 12. Later Joseph lived and died there, Genesis 39 through 50. There Israel became a nation. Egypt was to be severely punished because of her idolatry, Isaiah 19 verse 1. Her people were originally monotheistic but gradually lapsed into the basest idolatry. They worshipped the bull, the frog, the fish, and various birds. The contest in Exodus was a battle of the gods versus Jehovah. See Exodus chapter 7 through 12. Note Isaiah's prophecies in chapter 19 through 20. Egypt was to be given over to a cruel ruler, Isaiah 19 verse 4, who may have been the Ottoman Turk who reduced Egypt to a poverty-stricken nation. Egyptian would fight against Egyptian, 19 verse 2. A Pharaoh arose about the time of Isaiah who could not control this great kingdom, and the army no longer obeyed him. The channels along the Nile River would be filled and fouled with rotting reeds. This is true even today. The paper reeds up by the brooks would wither away, 19 verse 7, a reference to the papyri which was used in the day as paper. This was one of the main industries of Egypt and afforded a great volume of wealth. It disappeared, though, and no longer grows along the banks where Moses was once hidden. Egypt's fishing industry was to disappear, 19 verse 8 and verse 10. Her linen industry also was to disappear in Isaiah 19 verse 9. The linen of Egypt was world-renowned. The linen taken from mummies is superior to any linen that is made by the mills of Ireland. The fine twined BYSUS linen was used in the construction of the tabernacle. All this, however, has gone. Egypt was to stagger along in world history as a drunken man staggereth in his vomit, Isaiah 19 verse 14. Judah would be a terror to Egypt, 19 verse 17. Egypt was to be invaded within 3 years by Assyria, chapter 20 verse 1 through 6. But all this would someday gloriously change. God would smite Egypt in the tribulation, but would then graciously heal her, 19 verse 22. Egypt and Iraq will be connected by a highway, thus allowing both nations to freely travel to Jerusalem to worship God, Isaiah 19 verse 23 through 25. Edom, chapter 21 verse 11 and 12. This passage includes a question and an answer. The question, Watchman, what of the night? The answer, the morning cometh, and also the night. Both morning and night are coming. What will be glory for some? The Medes who would overrun Edom would be shame for the others, the Edomites. The New Testament likewise presents Christ's glorious coming as a night for some, the unsaved, see John 9 verse 4, and morning for the others, the saved, see Romans 13 verse 11 and 12. Arabia, chapter 21 verse 13 through 17. Arabia was the land of the Ishmaelites, the Bedouin tribes of the desert, the modern Arabs. They would be so severely judged that only a few of their stalwart archers would survive. 21 verse 17. Tyre, chapter 23. This is the 10th and last burden against the nations. J. Vernon McGee suggests that each of these great nations represented or symbolized some principle, philosophy, or even or system which God must judge. Thus, Babylon, the false religion and idolatry; Assyria, utter ruthlessness; Philistia, extreme pride; Moab, a formal religion; Damascus, compromise; Ethiopia, an industrial military complex; Egypt, the world; Edom, the flesh; Arabia, war; Tyre, big business. Tyre and Zidon were the two great cities of the Phoenicians. Their ships entered all ports of the Mediterranean Sea. They even penetrated the uncharted ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Their vessels brought tin from Great Britain. They settled the North African city of Carthage. Tyre was to be destroyed by the Babylonians and carried into captivity for 70 years, chapter 23, verse 15. This was to be done because of its pride and utter materialism. For several remarkable similarities in the history of Judah and the life of Nebuchadnezzar, see Jeremiah 25 verse 11, 29 verse 10, Daniel 9 verse 24, and 4 verse 28 through 37. Nebuchadnezzar would lay siege to the coastland city, raze its palaces, and make it a heap of ruins. Isaiah 23 verse 13. Egypt, its ally, would sorrow over its swift destruction, along with its own sailors, who would not even be able to return home to port. Isaiah 23 verse 5 through 7. For another remarkable similarity, see the sorrow of this world over the destruction of Babylon during the tribulation, Revelation chapter 18. After 70 years, Tyre would be rebuilt, as was Jerusalem, but soon would degenerate into the same gross materialism and pride as former days, Isaiah 23 verse 17. Note, at this point the student should carefully examine Ezekiel 26, where the historical account is completed. Alexander the Great utterly destroyed both the coastal and the island cities of Tyre in 332 BC. In the millennium, Tyre will be rebuilt and be blessed by God. See also Psalm chapter 45, verse 12. To be moved out of its place are the tribulation passages. The main passages in Isaiah chapter 2 verse 10 through 22, 13 verse 6 through 13, 24 verse 1 through 23, 26 verse 20 and verse 21, 34 verse 1 through 10, 42 verse 13 and 14, 51 verse 6, 63 verse 1 through 6, and 66 chapter 5, verse 15 and verse 16. The main action is the earth shall be terribly shaken, 2:21. To be moved out of its place, 13 verse 13. To be made waste and turned upside down, 24 verse 1. To be burned with fire, 24 verse 6. To be broken down and dissolved, 24 verse 19. To reel to and fro like a drunkard, 24 verse 20. To be unable to cover its head, 26 verse 21. The heavens, the stars, sun, and moon to be darkened, 13 verse 10. The host of heaven to be dissolved and rolled up as a scroll, 34 verse 4 and 51 verse 6. The stars shall fall as figs from a tree when shaken, 34 verse 4. Sinful mankind, to hide in the caves and holes of the earth, 2 verse 19, will faint with fear, and their hearts will melt, 13 verse 7 and 24 verse 17. To suffer the agonies of childbirth, 13 verse 8. To experience no joy whatsoever, 24 verse 8 through 10. To cover the mountains with their blood, and to overpower the valleys with the stench of their dead, 34 verse 3. To be utterly trampled by a wrathful God like overripe grapes, chapter 63 verse 3. The millennium, the salvation of the Gentile nations, Isaiah chapter 2 verse 2 through 4. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways. We will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Both Isaiah chapter 2 in verse 4 is inscribed upon the foundation of the United Nations building in New York City. This glorious truth will, of course, be literally realized during the millennium, but until that time, the fearful words of Joel chapter 3 verse 9 and 10, the exact reverse of this passage, will hold true. Chapter 11 verse 10, And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. Chapter 19, verse 18 through 25. Israel suffered perhaps more under the various brutal reign of Assyria and Egypt than any other two nations, but during the millennium, God will supernaturally unite these three into a beautiful trio of fellowship. The Egyptians will speak the Hebrew language. They will build an altar and monument to the Lord. God will answer their prayers and heal them. Both Egypt and Assyria, or Iraq, will be connected by a highway. Both shall worship Jehovah and receive his rich blessings. Isaiah 52 verse 10. The Lord hath made bare his holy arm in the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. Isaiah 56 verse 6 through 8. And Isaiah chapter 66 verse 23. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. See Revelation chapter 21 verse 23 through 27 for the same idea here. Number 2, the salvation of Israel and Jerusalem. Chapter 4 verse 2 through 6. They will be washed and rinsed of all their moral filth. They will once again be blessed by the fiery and cloudy pillar. Chapter 11 verse 12. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. 14 verse 3. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. Chapter 30 verse 19. For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. Thou shalt weep no more. He will be very gracious unto thee at the voice of thy cry. When he shall hear it, he will answer thee. Chapter 32 verse 18. And my people shall dwell in a peaceable habitation, and in sure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. Chapter 44 verse 23. Sing, O ye heavens, for the Lord hath done it. Shout, ye lower parts of the earth. Break forth into singing, ye mountains. O forest of every tree therein, and every tree therein. For the Lord hath redeemed Jacob, and glorified himself in Israel. See chapter 49 verse 10 through 13. Chapter 51 verse 3 and verse 11. For the Lord shall comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return, and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy shall be upon their head. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and mourning shall flee away. See Isaiah 52 verse 1 and verse 6 through 9. Isaiah 59 verse 20 and verse 21. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord. As for me, this is my covenant with thee, saith the Lord. My spirit that is up on thee, and my words which I have put in thy mouth, shall not depart out of thy mouth, nor the mouth of thy seed, nor the mouth of thy seed's seed, saith the Lord, from henceforth and forever. See also Isaiah 60 verse 1 through 3, verse 11, 12, 13, and verse 19 through 21. Isaiah 62 verse 1 through 4, Isaiah 65 verse 18 through 24, and now Isaiah 66 verse 10 and verse 12. Rejoice ye with Jerusalem, and be glad with her, all ye that love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all ye that mourn for her. For thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then shall ye suck, ye shall be borne upon her sides, and be dandled upon her knees. These glorious verses are condensed by Paul in Romans chapter 11 verse 1 and verse 26 and verse 27. Number 3, the salvation of the afflicted. Isaiah 29 verse 18. And in that day shall the deaf hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. See Isaiah 35 verse 3 through 6. Isaiah 42:16. And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make a darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them. These glorious verses are condensed by John in Revelation chapter 22, verse 1 through 5. The salvation of all nature, chapter 11, verse 6 through 9, chapter 14, verse 7 and verse 8. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing, yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Chapter 30, verse 23 through 36, chapter 35, verse 1, verse 2, and verse 7 through 10. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and thirsty land springs of water. And the habitation of dragons, where each lay, shall be grass with reeds and rushes. And an highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those the wayfaring men, though fools shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereupon. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there, and the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Chapter 40, verse 4 and verse 5. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Isaiah 65, verse 25. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and the dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, saith the Lord. These glorious verses are condensed by Paul in Romans chapter 8, verse 18 through 25. Nahum, he prophesied 630 to 612 BC. Introduction. The name Nahum means the Comforter. The New Testament Galilean headquarters of Jesus was a city called Capernaum, which literally means the village of Nahum. Many thus believe Capernaum was named after this prophet. The book has only one theme, the terrible and total coming destruction of Nineveh. At the time of this prophecy, Nineveh appeared to be impregnable, with its walls 100 feet high and broad enough for chariots to drive up on them. It had a circumference of some 60 miles and was adorned by more than 12,000 towers. Nineveh fell in 612, some 18 years after this prophecy, being completely destroyed by the Medes from the north and the Babylonians from the south. Nahum not only predicted the fall of Nineveh, but the very manner in which it would fall. See note 1:8, and the overrunning flood shall he make an utter end of the place. History tells us that Nabopolassar, king of the Babylonian invasion forces, besieged the city for 3 years, leading 3 massive attacks against it and failing each time. Because of this, the Assyrians inside Nineveh rejoiced and began holding drunken parties. But suddenly, the Tigris River overflowed its banks and sent its wildly running waters against the walls of the city. Soon it had washed a hole in it, into which rushed the Babylonians, and the proud city was destroyed. The destruction of Nineveh was so great that Alexander the Great marched his troops over the same desolate ground which had once given support to her mighty buildings, and did not even know there had once been a city there. The city itself was not excavated until as recently as AD 1845. God had once used Jonah 150 years before to ward off this judgment, but now, because of the city's relapse into gross sin, he calls upon Nahum to pronounce judgment. Chapter 1, verse 1 through 8, the patience of God. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power. See Genesis 15, verse 16, and Psalm 103, verse 8. For over 500 years, Nineveh and the Assyrians were feared as the terror of Western Asia, but while God's patience is infinite in depth, it is not eternal in duration. The time for judgment will soon come. Number 2, the pride of Sennacherib, chapter 1, verse 9 through 14. There is one come out of thee that imagineth evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. 1 verse 11. It is generally agreed that the wicked counselor here is Sennacherib, the evil Assyrian king who invaded Judah and surrounded Jerusalem in 707 BC. Although Sennacherib's army had been smashed at Jerusalem's gates and the monarch himself murdered years before in 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 35 through 37, the arrogant ruler seemed to symbolize the pride of Nineveh, and it is therefore used here. Sennacherib had made Nineveh a truly magnificent city, laying out its streets and squares and built within a famous place without a rival. The dimensions of this place were fantastic, 600 by 630 feet. It comprised at least 80 rooms, many of which were lined with sculpture. Number 3, the promise of Judah, chapter 1, verse 15. Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, and that publisheth peace. O that Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee, he is utterly cut off. Judah would need no longer fear this cruel nation. The punishment of Nineveh, chapter 2 through chapter 3. The certainty of this terrible punishment, chapter 3, verse 11 through 19. Nahum compared Nineveh to Thebes, Ammon, see chapter 3, verse 8, that great capital of Upper Egypt. It too boasted that no power on earth could subdue it. However, both Jeremiah in Jeremiah 46, verse 25, and Ezekiel in Ezekiel 30, verse 14 through 16, predicted its destruction, which was fulfilled later by Sargon of Assyria in his campaign against Egypt. Now Nineveh's hour had come. The description of this terrible judgment. Shields flash red in the sunlight. The attack begins. See their scarlet uniforms. See their glittering chariots moving forward side by side, pulled by prancing steeds. Your own chariots race recklessly along the streets and through the squares, darting like lightning, gleaming like torches. The king shouts for his officers. They stumble in their haste, rushing to the walls to set up their defenses, but too late. The river gates are open. The enemy has entered. The palace is in panic. The queen of Nineveh is brought out naked to the streets and led away, a slave, with all her maidens weeping after her. Listen to them mourn like doves and beat their breast. Nineveh is like a leaking water tank. Her soldiers slip away, deserting her. She cannot hold them back. Stop, stop, she shouts, but they keep on running. Loot the silver, loot the gold. There seems to be no end of treasures. Her vast, uncounted wealth is stripped away. Soon the city is an empty shambles. Hearts melt in horror. Knees quake. Her people stand aghast, pale-faced and trembling. Nahum chapter 2, verse 3 through 10, the Living Bible. Zephaniah prophesied 625 through 610 BC. Introduction. The name Zephaniah means the Lord hides or protects. He was the great-great-grandson of King Hezekiah and therefore of royal blood. He ministered during the days of King Josiah, Judah's last godly ruler. The prophet was kin to Josiah. His ministry may well have helped prepare for the great revival of 621 BC, which occurred under Josiah's reign when the law of Moses was rediscovered during the repair of the temple. See 2 Chronicles chapter 34 and chapter 35. A bad day, the prophet pronounces judgment, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 8. The fact of this judgment, God will sweep away everything in the land and destroy it to the ground. This would include man, birds, and even fish. Chapter 1, verse 2 through 4. The reason for this judgment. Judah had worshipped Baal, the great god of the Canaanite pantheon, and Milcom, the chief Ammonite deity, thus ignoring the only true God. Chapter 1, verse 5 and verse 6. The name of this judgment the prophet calls it the day of the Lord. This term is used no less than 7 times. See chapter 1, verse 7 and 8, 14, 18, chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. The results of this judgment, chapter 1, verse 14 through 18. Note, Zephaniah evidently had in mind not only the historical Babylon invasion of 605 to 586 BC, but also the yet future Great Tribulation. See Revelation chapter 6, verse 12 through 17. Upon the enemies of God. The Philistine cities of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron would be rooted out and left in desolation. Chapter 2, verse 2 through 4. Moab and Ammon would be destroyed as Sodom and Gomorrah for mocking Judah and invading her land. Zephaniah 2, verse 8 through 11, and also see Genesis chapter 19. Ethiopia would be slain by God's avenging sword. See chapter 2, verse 12. Assyria and its capital were to be made utterly desolate. Zephaniah 2, verse 13 through 15. Upon the city of God, a cry of alarm would begin at the fish gate in Jerusalem. It would be heard from gate to gate until it reached the highest part of the city. Zephaniah 1, verse 10. God planned to search with lanterns in Jerusalem's darkest corners to find and destroy all sinners. Chapter 1, verse 12 and verse 13. The city's leaders were like roaring lions and ravenous wolves, devouring any and all victims. Chapter 3, verse 1 through 7. Number 2, a glad day. The prophet announces justice. Chapter 3, verse 8 through 20. A, upon the once enemies of God. Chapter 3, verse 9 and 10. For then will I turn to the people a pure language, and that they may call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughters of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. Note the pure language of chapter 3, verse 9 may refer to 2 things. It may indicate a reversal of the language cursed at Babel in Genesis 11, verse 9, thus allowing redeemed man to once again enjoy a universal language, perhaps composed of the best from all known existing human languages. It doubtless carries with it a morality purity. In other words, this new language will have no filthy 4-letter words. Upon the land of God, chapter 3, verse 13, the remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies. Neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth, for they shall feed and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. And upon the city of God, chapter 3, verse 14 through 20 of Zephaniah, Jerusalem will once again be filled with singers singing, for the theme of their song, the King of Israel will be there. Chapter 3, verse 14 and 15, and God himself will lead this happy song. Chapter 3, verse 17. Habakkuk prophesied in 620 to 610 BC. Introduction. His name means to embrace. Habakkuk was the last of the minor prophets writing to the southern kingdom before the Babylonian captivity in 606 BC, just as Micah was the final prophet to the northern kingdom prior to the Assyrian captivity in 721 BC. He was apparently one of the Levitical choristers in the temple. His closing statement for the chief musician on my stringed instrument reveals that this is actually a song. It is a book of deepest doubt. Habakkuk has been called the doubting Thomas of the Old Testament. His doubts centered around 2 painful problems. How could God allow the sins of Israel to go unpunished? God then tells him Judah would indeed be punished by the Babylonians. How then, he asked, could God justify allowing a godless nation to punish Judah, which nation at least believed in God and had some good men left in it? Habakkuk sees one of the greatest manifestations of God's glory and power in all the Bible in chapter 3, verse 1 through 6 of Habakkuk. It is reminiscent of that at Mount Sinai as viewed by Moses, the man of God, in Exodus chapter 19. Habakkuk's great theological declaration, the just shall live by faith, chapter 2, verse 4, is quoted no less than 3 times in the New Testament, Romans 1, verse 17, Galatians 3, verse 11, and Hebrews 10, verse 38. It has been noted that the book opens with gloom but ends with glory. The doubts of the prophet turn into shouts. The doubts, chapter 1 through chapter 2. His question, will you punish our nation? The prophet was grieved over the wickedness of Judah. Wherever he looked, he saw oppression and bribery. Chapter 1, verse 3. The laws were not enforced, and in the courts unrighteousness prevailed. 1 verse 4. God's answer, I will through Judah's foes. This would be done even during Habakkuk's lifetime. Chapter 1 verse 5. He was raising a new force on the world scene. The Chaldeans, a tribe of Semites living between Babylon and the Persian Gulf, who began to assert themselves against the Assyrians around 630 BC. See chapter 1 verse 6. They would become notorious for their cruelty. 1 verse 7. Their horses were swifter than leopards. 1 verse 8. Their warriors were more fierce than wolves at dusk. 1 verse 8. His question, will you punish these Chaldeans also? Habakkuk could not comprehend why God would let this pagan nation punish his own people, even though they were admittedly guilty of gross sin. Chapter 1, verse 12 through 17. Thou art of pure eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devours the man that is more righteous than he? Habakkuk continues to probe for answers. He wants to know, will God's people be caught and killed like fish? Chapter 1, verse 14. Would they be strung up on hooks and dragged along in tents? Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 15. God then answers his questions concerning whether he would punish the Chaldeans. God's answer, I will through my woes. Habakkuk climbs upon his watchtower to await God's answer. Soon it comes. God tells him the Chaldeans would indeed be punished, but only at his appointed time. Chapter 2, verse 3. This later took place for some 75 years later. Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians. See Daniel chapter 5. Babylon was to be judged for their many sins. They had destroyed many nations without a shred of pity. Chapter 2, verse 8. They had degenerated into a nation of drunkards. 2 verse 5. They had worshipped various pagan idols. 2 verse 18 and 19. All this was sure to take place, for the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. 2 verse 20. In other words, the trial is to begin. The judge is on his bench, therefore let the court remain silent. Number 2, the shouts. 3 shouts. A soul of the prophet is revived. Habakkuk had even before this included that the just shall live by faith. 2 verse 4. But now he probed deeper into the grace and glory of God. O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy. Chapter 3 verse 2. The eyes of the prophet are reassured. Chapter 3 verse 3 through 16. Habakkuk sees an awesome manifestation of God's majestic glory. He sees him moving across the deserts from Mount Sinai. His brilliant splendor fills the earth and sky. From his hands flash rays of brilliant light. Habakkuk sees him stop for a moment, gazing upon the earth. He then shakes the nations, scattering the everlasting mountains. He sees him in a historical vision part the waters of the Red Sea. Exodus 14. He sees him lead Israel across the hostile desert into Palestine. The heart of the prophet rejoices. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Chapter 3, verse 18, Habakkuk. The feet of the prophet are renewed. The Lord is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet. He will make me to walk upon my high places. Habakkuk 3, verse 19. Jeremiah, the destiny of the southern kingdom. The rulers under whom Jeremiah ministered. Josiah. Jeremiah was called by God during the reign of Josiah, Judah's last good king. Jehoiakim, this wicked king, burned Jeremiah's original written prophecy scroll. Jehoiachin, this 90-day wonder, is soundly condemned by Jeremiah. Zedekiah, the prophet, suffered much under the reign of Zedekiah, Judah's final king. Nebuchadnezzar, Jeremiah is treated with respect by the great Babylonian conqueror. Gedaliah, he was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar to govern the fallen city of Jerusalem. Johanan, he took over after the tragic assassination of Gedaliah and later forced Jeremiah to accompany a Jewish remnant to Egypt. Number 2, the threefold ministry of Jeremiah. He warned the majority still in Judah about the coming Babylonian captivity. He comforted the minority already captive in Babylon. See chapter 29. Jeremiah wrote a letter of encouragement to the Jewish exiles in Babylon. Chapter 29, verse 1 through 32. They were to settle down for a long 70-year stay. They were to pray for the peace and prosperity of Babylon, that their own lives might be peaceful. They were to ignore the lies of these false prophets and mediums in Babylon, lest they be punished along with them. Jeremiah pronounced God's death sentence upon 2 of these prophets named Ahab and Zedekiah for their lying messages and their sins of adultery. Jeremiah 29, verse 20 through 23. He also warned the exiles concerning a man named Shemaiah, who was sending poisoned pen letters from Babylon to the influential leaders in Jerusalem against Jeremiah. Jeremiah 29, verse 23 through 32. God still loved them and would someday bring them back to Jerusalem. Jeremiah 29, verse 14. He pronounced judgment upon the 9 Gentile nations, chapter 46 through 51. These nations were Egypt, in 46, verse 1 through 27, Philistia, 47, verse 1 through 6, Moab, 48, verse 1 through 47, Ammon, 49, verse 1 through 6, Edom, 49, verse 7 through 22, Damascus, 49, verse 23 through 27, Kedar and Hazor, Jeremiah 49, 28 through 33, Elam, chapter 49, verse 34 through 39, and Babylon, chapters 50 and 51. After listing these nations, Jeremiah dealt with each one in a specific way. Egypt, chapter 46, verse 1 through 27. Egypt would be defeated by Nebuchadnezzar in the battle of Carchemish. Jeremiah 46, verse 2. Their armies would flee in terror and fill the Euphrates with corpses. Jeremiah 46, verse 5 and 6. Their sin would, like Judah's, was incurable. Jeremiah 46, verse 11. Pharaoh Hophra, the Egyptian leader, is ridiculed as a man of plenty of noise but no power. Jeremiah 46, verse 17. Egypt would be occupied by Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah 46, verse 26. Then upon Philistia, in chapter 47, verse 1 through 6. It was to be overrun by the Egyptians. This occurred in 606 BC, the year King Josiah died, in chapter 47, verse 1. Strong Philistine men would scream and fathers would flee, leaving behind their helpless children, chapter 47, verse 2 and verse 3 of Jeremiah. Philistia's allies, Tyre and Zidon, would be destroyed at the same time, 47, verse 4. The 2 chief Philistine cities of Gaza and Ascalon would be totally destroyed, chapter 47, verse 5. Upon Moab, chapter 48, verse 1 through 47. Nebuchadnezzar's armies would overrun Moab, chapter 48, verse 1 and 2. Their god Chemosh was to be carried away with priests and princes, 48, verse 7. Prior to this time, Moab had been relatively undisturbed from various invasions, 48, verse 11. In the end, Moab will be ashamed of her national god, idol god Chemosh, as Israel was of her calf god at Bethel, 48, verse 13. The ancestor of the Moabites, Moab, was born in a cave. Genesis 19, verse 37. During the fearful Babylonian invasion, the Moabites will once again flee into the caves. Jeremiah 48, verse 28. Upon Ammon, Jeremiah 49, verse 1 through 6. This nation will be punished for occupying the cities of Israel after the captivity and worshiping the false god Milcom, 49, verse 1. Milcom, along with the Ammonite princes and priests, would be carried away, 49, verse 3. Ammon will be reestablished during the millennium, 49, verse 6, Jeremiah. Edom, 49, verse 7 through 22. Edom's cities would become as silent as Sodom and Gomorrah, 49, verse 18. Their cry will be heard as far as the Red Sea, 49, verse 21. God will, however, still be merciful to her widows and orphans. Jeremiah 49, verse 11. Upon Damascus, Jeremiah 49, verse 23 through 27. Her entire army would be destroyed in one single day. Jeremiah 49, verse 26. A fire would start at the edge of the city and eventually burn up the palaces of Ben-Hadad. 49, verse 27. Kedar and Hazor, 49, 28 through 34. Kedar was the name of an Arab tribe living in the desert east of Palestine, which was to be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. 49 verse 28. God himself ordered Nebuchadnezzar to destroy these wealthy, materialistic, and arrogant Bedouin tribes. 49 verse 31. Hazor, another Arabian tribe, located nearby, was to be leveled also, never again to be rebuilt. 49 verse 33. Upon Elam, 49 verse 34 through 39. Elam was east of the Tigris River. Elam was east of the Tigris-Euphrates country, with its capital at Susa, and overrun by Nebuchadnezzar in the winter of 596 BC. Zedekiah, Judah's last king, began ruling in Jerusalem at this time. Jeremiah 49 verse 34. Elam is to be reestablished during the millennium. Jeremiah 49 verse 39. Babylon, chapter 50, verse 1 through chapter 51, verse 64. Two Babylons seem to be referred to in these verses. One is the historical Babylon, captured by Darius the Persian in October of 539 BC, see Daniel chapter 5, and the other is future Babylon, which will be destroyed by God himself, see Revelation 18, verse 18. After the destruction of both Babylons, Israel would seek their God. This happened historically in Ezra chapter 1 and will occur in the future, Zechariah 13, verse 9 through 11. After the final destruction of Babylon in Revelation 18, the city will never be inhabited again. Jeremiah 51, verse 26. The ungodly nations would weep over the destruction of both Babylons, Revelation 18, Jeremiah 50, verse 46. The ungodly nations would weep over the destruction of both Babylons, as we just said. The Israelites were to flee from both Babylons. Revelation 18 verse 4 and Jeremiah 51 verse 6. Both cities are depicted as golden cups filled with iniquities from which the nations have drunk and become mad. Revelation 17 verse 1 through 6 and Jeremiah 51 verse 7. All heaven rejoices over the destruction of both Babylons. Jeremiah 51 verse 10 and verse 48 and Revelation 18 verse 20. Number 3, a personal history of Jeremiah. He is called into full-time service during the reign of Josiah. Jeremiah 1 verse 1 through 10. He was to remain unmarried. Jeremiah 16 verse 2. Jeremiah was the son of Hilkiah, a priest living in Anathoth, some 3 miles northeast of Jerusalem in the land of Benjamin. Jeremiah 1 verse 1. He received his call to full-time service during the 13th year of godly King Josiah in 1 verse 6. Jeremiah at first protested this call, as Moses once did. See Exodus chapter 3 and 4. Pleading his youth as an excuse. Jeremiah 1 verse 6. He was quickly reassured by God, however, that the Lord had already chosen him prior to his birth as a divine spokesman to the nation. Jeremiah 1 verse 5. God would therefore give his chosen messenger the message. Jeremiah 1 verse 7 through 10. Because of his fearless sermons on the coming judgment, Jeremiah was persecuted by his own family in Jeremiah 12 verse 6, the townspeople of Anathoth, Jeremiah 11 verse 21, and eventually the entire nation of Judah. As he began his ministry, God showed him two things which underlined the nature and importance of his call. He was shown an almond tree rod. 1 verse 11. Because it flowers earlier than the other trees, the almonds signify the near fulfillment of God's proposed judgment. He saw a pot of boiling water tipping southward from the north. This symbolized the Babylonian invasion. Jeremiah 1 verse 13. Jeremiah weeps over Judah's coming destruction. Jeremiah 4 verse 19 through 21. He would often do this. In Jeremiah 8 verse 18 and verse 21, 9 verse 1 and 2 and verse 10, 13 verse 17 and 14 verse 17. He is commanded like the Greek Diogenes who once ran through the streets of Athens with a lantern trying to find an honest man by God to run to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem and see now and know and seek in its broad places, if you can find a man, if there be any that executeth justice, that seeketh the truth, and I will pardon her. Jeremiah 5, verse 1. God had once made a similar arrangement with Abraham concerning Sodom, Genesis 18, verse 22, verse 23 through 33. Jeremiah admits that this dreadful condition existed among the poor and ignorant, but that he felt he could find honest men within the ranks of Judah's educated and rich rulers. However, they too had utterly rejected God. Jeremiah 5, verse 4 and 5. After a fruitful 31-year reign, Josiah dies. A weeping prophet attends his funeral in 2 Chronicles 35, verse 25. Judah's last good king had gone, and it would be downhill spiritually from that point on. He pleads with Judah to return to God. Jeremiah 3, verse 12 through 14, and 26, verse 1 through 7. God would repeatedly invite Israel back to himself. Jeremiah 2, verse 9. He would receive Israel even after her immorality with other lovers. Jeremiah 3, verse 1. This was prohibited under the Mosaic law, Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 through 4. Jeremiah pleaded with them to plow up the hardness of their hearts, lest all be choked up by thorns. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 3 and 4. They could still escape judgment by cleansing their hearts and purifying their thoughts. Jeremiah 4:14. To repent meant they would remain in the land. Jeremiah 7, verse 3. To refuse meant to be covered by thick darkness. Jeremiah 13, verse 16. He fearlessly pronounced judgment at the hands of the Babylonians. He then lists Judah's sins. Judah had forsaken the fountain of divine water and built broken cisterns which could hold no water. Jeremiah 2:13. The nation had become a race of evil men. Chapter 2, verse 21. No amount of soap or lye could make them clean. Chapter 2, verse 22. The rulers had stained their clothes with the blood of the innocent and the poor. 2, verse 34. They were as an unashamed prostitute. 3, verse 3. They worshiped false gods upon every hill and under every shade tree. 3, verse 6. They had killed their prophets as a lion would slaughter his prey. 2, verse 30. They were as insolent as brass and hard as and cruel as iron. Chapter 6, verse 28. They had set up the idols right in the temple and worshipped the pagan queen of heaven, goddess. Chapter 7, verse 18, and chapter 44, verse 17. They had actually sacrificed their little children as burnt offerings to devil gods. 7, verse 31, 19, verse 5. He finally warns them concerning the terrible results of their disobedience. Great armies would march upon Jerusalem. Neither Assyria or Egypt could help Judah against Babylon. Chapter 2, verse 18 and verse 36. People will flee from Judah's cities as one runs from a hungry lion. Chapter 4, verse 5 through 7. Jerusalem will be surrounded as by hunters who move in on wild and wounded animals. Chapter 4, verse 17. Chapter 6, verse 3 through 5. They will cry out as a woman in delivery. Chapter 4, verse 31, 6, verse 24, and 13, verse 21. Jerusalem's own trees would be cut down and used against her walls as battering rams. Chapter 6, verse 6. The temple would be destroyed. Chapter 7, verse 14. Enemy troops would then move among the people like poisonous snakes. Chapter 8, verse 17. Many would die by the sword in 15 verse 3, disease 16 verse 3 and 4, and starvation 21 verse 9. Some would be scattered as chaff by the fierce desert winds 13 verse 24. Unburied corpses would litter the valleys outside Jerusalem and become food for wild animals and birds. 7 verse 32 and 33, and 9 verse 22, 12 verse 8 and 9. Judah's enemies would break up all the sacred graves of her kings, priests, and prophets and spread out their bones on the ground before the sun, moon, and stars. 8 verse 1 and 2. Thousands would be carried away into Babylon for a period of 70 years, 7 verse 15, 25 verse 11, 29 verse 10. The severity of Judah's punishment would astonish the onlooking pagan Gentile nations. 19 verse 8, 22 verse 8, 25 verse 11. When the people ridicule and reject his message, the warning prophet becomes a weeping prophet. 4:19, 8:21, 9 verse 1 and 2, verse 10, 13 verse 17, and 14 verse 17. Because of his sermons and stand, Jeremiah suffers much. He is persecuted by his own family. Jeremiah 12 verse 6. He is plotted against by the people of his hometown. Chapter 11 verse 21. He is rejected and reviled by his peers in the religious world. Pashur, the chief temple priest, has him whipped and put in stocks. Chapter 20 verse 1 through 3. He is almost murdered by a wild mob of priests and prophets after one of his messages. Chapter 26 verse 7 through 9. He is ridiculed by a false prophet named Hananiah. Jeremiah 28. He is threatened by King Jehoiakim. Chapter 28 verse 21 through 24, and chapter 36 verse 26. He is arrested, flogged, and accused of treason. Jeremiah 37 verse 11 through 16. Zedekiah sends to Jeremiah asking for his prayers after Nebuchadnezzar had declared war on Judah. Jeremiah 21 verse 1 and 2. Jeremiah sends word back to the wicked king stating that prayers were useless on this subject, for God would use the Babylonians to punish Jerusalem, and Zedekiah himself was to be given over to Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah 21 verse 3 through 7. Jeremiah tells Zedekiah that Jerusalem will be burned and he is to be captured and carried into Babylon. Jeremiah 34 verse 1 through 5. Jeremiah rebukes those rich Jewish homeowners who violated the Mosaic law, which demanded all Hebrew servants to be set free after serving 6 years. Jeremiah 34 verse 8 through 16. Pharaoh Hophra's Egyptian armies had arrived to aid Judah in fighting Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah warns Zedekiah that their political alliance would fail, for Nebuchadnezzar would defeat the Egyptians. Jeremiah 37 verse 5 through 10. Jeremiah attempts to visit the land of Benjamin at this time to inspect some property he had bought. Jeremiah 37 verse 11 and 12. However, a guard named Arijah arrests him at the city gate and accuses him of defecting to the Babylonians. Jeremiah 37 verse 13. Jeremiah denies this, but is flogged and thrown into prison. Jeremiah 37 verse 14 through 16. He is soon secretly sent for by Zedekiah and once again predicts the defeat of Jerusalem. 37 verse 17. Jeremiah places him in the palace prison instead of returning him to the dungeon he was formerly in. 37 verse 21. In the palace, however, pressure from the religious officials who despised Jeremiah eventually forced Zedekiah to return the prophet to a more crude confinement. This time he is lowered by ropes into an empty cistern in the prison yard, where he soon sinks down into a thick layer of mire at the bottom. Jeremiah 38 verse 1 through 6. Eventually, an Ethiopian friend, Ebed-Melech, persuades Zedekiah to remove him from this filthy place. It takes 30 men to haul him from the cistern. He is returned to the palace prison. Jeremiah 38 verse 7 through 13. Jeremiah again predicts the fall of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 38 verse 14 through 17. See also 32 verse 1 through 5. He will remain in the prison until the city was taken. Jeremiah 38 verse 28. He seeks his original manuscript burned by the wicked king Jehoiakim. Jeremiah 36 verse 21 through 23. He is ordered to have his scribe Baruch write down all those oral messages he had been given for the past 23 years. Jeremiah 36 verse 1 and 2. Baruch does this and reads them to the people in the temple. Jeremiah 36 verse 8. He then is invited to read them to the religious officials. When he finishes, they are badly frightened and decide King Jehoiakim should also hear them. Jeremiah 36 verse 14 through 16. An official named Jehudi thereupon reads them to Jehoiakim as the sullen king sits in front of his fireplace. As Jehudi finishes reading 3 or 4 columns, Jehoiakim will take his knife, slit off the section of the roll, and throw it into the fire. Finally, the entire scroll is destroyed. Jeremiah 36 verse 21 through 23. Jeremiah is then commanded to rewrite the burned sections plus a good deal of additional material, including these fearful words about Jehoiakim. Therefore thus saith the Lord of Jehoiakim king of Judah, he shall have none to sit upon the throne of David, and his dead body shall be cast out into the day in the day of heat, and in the night to the frost. And I will punish him and his seed and his servants for their iniquity, and I will bring upon them and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem and upon the men of Judah all the evil that I pronounced against them, but they hearkened not. Then took Jeremiah another roll and gave it to Baruch the scribe, the son of Neriah, who wrote therein from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the book which Jehoiakim king of Judah had burned in the fire, and there were added besides unto them many like words. After Jehoiakim burns the scroll, Baruch becomes despondent. It had probably taken him a year to write the material. God then both warns and encourages him through Jeremiah. Jeremiah 45, verse 1 through 5. He is now commanded by God not to pray for Judah. Jeremiah 7, verse 16, 11, verse 14, 14, verse 11, and 16, verse 5. He experiences frustration and depression. Jeremiah 20, verse 7 through 9, and verses 14 through 18. Jeremiah had become so frustrated over his inability to call Judah back to God that he determined to quit the ministry. Then I said, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more in his name. But his word was in my heart like a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I was weary with forbearing, and I could not refrain. Jeremiah 20, verse 9. See also 1 Kings 19, verse 3 and 4, Jonah chapter 1, verse 1 through 3, and 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16. At this time, he utters one of the most despondent prayers in all the Bible. See also Job chapter 3. Cursed be the day wherein I was born. Let not the day wherein my mother bare me be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought tidings to my father, saying, a man-child is born unto thee, making him very glad. And let that man be as the cities which the Lord overthrew, and repented not. And let him hear the cry in the morning, and the shouting at noontide, because he slew me not from the womb, or that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb to be always great with me. Wherefore came I forth out of the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame. Jeremiah 20, verse 14 through 18. He writes a letter of encouragement to those Jewish exiles already in Babylon in Jeremiah chapter 29. While in prison, he is ordered by God to buy a field from his cousin Hanamel. This was to illustrate that in spite of the advancing Babylonian armies, houses and fields and vineyards shall be possessed again in this land. Jeremiah 32, verse 15. The background of all this is interesting. God tells Jeremiah that his cousin Hanamel was soon to visit him, attempting to sell the prophet a farm he owned in Anathoth. Jeremiah was to buy it for 17 shekels of silver. Jeremiah 32, verse 6 through 13. Baruch was then to place the sealed deed in a pottery jar and bury it. All this was to demonstrate that someday people would once again own property in Judah and buy and sell. Jeremiah 32, verse 14 and 15. Jeremiah is comforted during this time in prison by God's gracious promise, call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. Jeremiah 33, verse 3. These tremendous and thrilling things are listed in chapters 30, 31, and 33. They include the following. In spite of the impending Babylonian captivity, the time was coming when God would heal Jerusalem's hurt and give her prosperity and peace. Jeremiah 33, verse 4 through 6. He still loved Israel with an everlasting love. Jeremiah 31, verse 3. Israel would be gathered into Palestine from the earth's farthest ends. Jeremiah 31, verse 8. See also chapter 30, verse 3, verse 10, and verse 11. They shall come with weeping, and with supplications will I lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of water in a straight way, in which they shall not stumble, for I am a father to Israel. Therefore they shall come and sing in the height of Zion to the goodness of the Lord, and their soul shall be like a watered garden, and they shall not sorrow any more at all. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 9 and verse 12. Note in Jeremiah 31 verse 15 and 16, Jeremiah predicts that the loud wails and bitter weeping of Rachel for her children in Ramah will disappear. Ramah is an ancient reference to the area in and around Bethlehem. It was here that Nebuchadnezzar killed many sick and feeble exile captives who would not be able to endure the long trip to Babylon. Rachel, who was the wife of Jacob, is of course symbolic of all weeping Israelite mothers. In Matthew 2 verse 18, this sad verse is linked to that occasion when Herod murdered the babies of Bethlehem in an attempt to kill Christ. During the millennium, Israel will understand the necessity for and the purpose of all their sufferings. Jeremiah 31 verse 18 and 19. The cities of Israel will be rebuilt, and Jerusalem is to become the praise and power center of all the earth. Jeremiah 33 verse 7 through 9, 31 verse 38 and 39, and 30 verse 18 through 21. Jeremiah sees two baskets of figs in the temple. One basket has fresh, well-ripened figs, but the other contains some rotten ones. Jeremiah 24, verse 1 through 3. God explains that the fresh figs represent the Jewish exiles in Babylon, men such as Daniel and Ezekiel, while the rotten fruit depicts Zedekiah and his corrupt officials. Jeremiah 24, verse 4 through 8. Jeremiah is ordered to make a yoke and fasten it upon his neck with leather thongs. He is then to send messages to the kings of Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Zidon through their ambassadors in Jerusalem, warning them that God has given their nations over to Babylon. Those who submit and wear the yoke of punishment with true repentance will be spared, but those who refuse will be destroyed. Jeremiah 23, verse 1 through 11. After God had used Nebuchadnezzar to punish Judah and his neighboring nations, he would chastise Babylon itself. Jeremiah 27, verse 7. Judah is reassured that after the Babylonian captivity, she will be gathered back to Jerusalem. Jeremiah 27, verse 22. Jeremiah is accused of lying by a false prophet named Hananiah, who had predicted the Babylonian captivity would last for only 2 years, and that those already in exile, such as King Jehoiachin, Daniel, Ezekiel, etc., would be returned along with all the temple treasury which had been taken. Jeremiah 28, verse 1 through 4. To dramatize his accusation, Hananiah breaks the yoke worn by Jeremiah. Jeremiah 28, verse 10 and 11. Jeremiah predicts Hananiah's death by God's hand in the near future because of the prophet's lying ministry. Within 2 years he was dead. Jeremiah 28, verse 13 through 17. Jeremiah visits a settlement where the Rechabite families lived. These individuals belonged to a religious order founded by Jonadab, son of Rechab, during the reign of Jehu in 841 through 814 BC. They assisted in the eradication of Baalism from Israel. Avoiding city life, they lived as shepherds, drinking no wine. Jeremiah 35, verse 2. Jeremiah is commanded to test the people by offering them wine. They immediately refuse, saying, "We will drink no wine, for Jonadab the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, saying, You shall drink no wine, neither ye nor your sons forever." Jeremiah 35, verse 6. Jeremiah then relates this sterling example to Judah and contrasts the obedience of the Rechabites to the disobedience of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 35, verse 12 through 19. He preaches a sermon at the temple gate and is nearly killed by an angry mob for predicting the temple would be destroyed. Jeremiah 26, verse 6 through 9. He is defended by some Judah's wise old men who remind the angry mob that Jeremiah's message is like that of the prophet Micah. Micah 3, verse 12. See Jeremiah 26, verse 17 through 19. Jeremiah under Nebuchadnezzar. Zedekiah attempts to escape the doomed city, but is captured near Jericho and brought back to Jerusalem. Here he is forced to witness the execution of his own sons and then submit to the agony of his eyes being gouged out. Jeremiah 39, verse 4 through 7, and Jeremiah 52, verse 6 through 11. Nebuchadnezzar instructs his chief of staff, Nebuzaradan, to treat Jeremiah with kindness. Jeremiah 39, verse 11 and 12. Jeremiah is released from prison and taken by Nebuzaradan to Ramah. Here he is offered his choice of going on to Babylon or returning to Jerusalem. Jeremiah chooses to return and is placed under the protection of the new Jewish governor of Jerusalem, a man named Gedaliah. Jeremiah chapter 40, verse 1 through 6, and chapter 39, verse 14. Jeremiah under Gedaliah. Gedaliah attempts to institute a moderate post-war administration over the devastated city of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 40, verse 7 through 12. This soon arouses the fury of a Jewish rebel leader named Ishmael, who plots to assassinate Gedaliah. The governor is warned of this plot by a man named Johanan, but refuses to take it seriously. Jeremiah 40, verse 13 through 16. Gedaliah is murdered by Ishmael, along with many other Jewish officials, pilgrims, and some Babylonian soldiers. Some of their bodies are hurled down an empty cistern. Jeremiah 41, verse 1 through 9. Johanan arrives upon the scene of the massacre and soon restores order. Jeremiah 41, verse 11 through 17. Jeremiah under Johanan. Johanan asked Jeremiah to determine God's will for the tiny Jewish remnant still in Jerusalem. Jeremiah 42, verse 1 through 5. After a 10-day prayer session with God, Jeremiah is told the Lord desired the remnant to remain in Jerusalem and not to go to Egypt, as some were already planning to do. Jeremiah 46, verse 6 through 22. Upon hearing this unwelcome report, Johanan and other leaders accused Jeremiah of lying. Then they disobeyed the clearly revealed word of God by going to Egypt. Jeremiah is forced to accompany them. Jeremiah 43, verse 1 through 7. Upon reaching Egypt, many of the Jews returned to their old habits of idolatry. They began burning incense to the Queen of Heaven. This was another name for Ishtar, the pagan Mesopotamian goddess of love and war. Jeremiah 44, verse 8 through 10, and verse 15 through 19. Jeremiah pronounces the divine death penalty upon all who refuse to repent and return to Jerusalem. Jeremiah 44, verse 7 through 14, and verse 28. To dramatize this bitter truth, he buries some large rocks between the pavement stones at the entrance of Pharaoh's palace. This signified that Nebuchadnezzar would occupy Egypt and set his throne upon those stones. Jeremiah predicted he would then kill many of the Jewish remnant who refused to return. The others would die of various plagues or be enslaved. Jeremiah 43, verse 9 through 13. The prophecies of Jeremiah, the fall of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 1, 14 through 16, and 3, chapter 3, chapter 4, verse 5 through 9, chapter 5, verse 15 through 17, 6, 1 through 6, 32, verse 2 and 3, and 38, verse 17 and 18. The destruction of the temple. Jeremiah 7, verse 11 through 15, and 26, verse 6 through 9. The death of the deposed Judean king Jehoahaz in Egypt. Jeremiah 22, verse 10 through 12. The ignoble and unlamented death of King Jehoiakim. Jeremiah 36, verse 27 through 30. He soundly condemns Jehoiakim for his wicked reign. Jeremiah 22, verse 13 through 19. He was constructing an extravagant palace with forced labor. He had murdered the innocent and oppressed the poor. He was filled with selfish greed and dishonesty. About this time, one of Jeremiah's fellow prophets, Uriah, is murdered by Jehoiakim for his fearless preaching. See Jeremiah 26, verse 20 through 23. Therefore, Jeremiah predicts that the king will die unlamented and be buried like a dead donkey, dragged out of the Jerusalem and thrown into the garbage dump beyond the gate. The cutting off from the royal line of King Jehoiachin. Chapter 22, verse 24 through 30. This young son of Jehoiakim ruled only 3 months, but so aroused the divine wrath of heaven that Jeremiah is told, had he been the signet ring of God's right hand, he would still have been cast off and given to the Babylonians. Jeremiah 22, verse 24 and 25. Jeremiah predicted that this 90-day wonder would be given over to Nebuchadnezzar, be cast out of the land along with his mother, die in a foreign land, be discarded as a discarded and broken dish, be considered childless even though he had offspring as far as the throne of David was concerned. Jeremiah 22, verse 25 through 29. The death of the two false prophet Zedekiah and Ahab, and the punishment of another, Shemaiah, who were ministering among the first Jewish captivity exiles in Babylon. Jeremiah 29, verse 20 through 32. The death of a false Jerusalem prophet named Hananiah. Jeremiah 28, verse 13 through 17. The captivity of Syriah. Jeremiah warns a man named Syriah that he will be taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar at a later date. This literally happened some 6 years later, Jeremiah 51, verse 59. Syriah is then given a scroll containing Jeremiah's prophecies against Babylon. When he arrives there, the prophet commands him to publicly read it and then tie a rock to the scroll and throw it into the Euphrates River. This symbolizes that Babylon would sink, never to rise again. Jeremiah 51, verse 60 through 64. The failure of the Egyptian-Judean military alliance from Babylon. Jeremiah 37, verse 5 through 10. The defeat of Egypt by Babylon. Jeremiah 46, verse 1 through 26. Jeremiah describes in avid detail the world-famous battle at Carchemish at the very moment when it is being fought. Egypt suffers a resounding defeat at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah 46, verse 1 through 12. The eventual occupation of Egypt by Babylon. Jeremiah 43, verse 9 through 12. The 70-year captivity of Judah into Babylon. Jeremiah 25, verse 11 and 29, verse 10. The restoration after the 70 years to Jerusalem. Jeremiah 27, verse 19 through 21. Chapter 30, verse 3, verse 10 and 11, and verse 18 through 21. Jeremiah 31, verse 9, verse 12, verse 38 and 39, and Jeremiah 33, verse 3 through 9. Jeremiah promises ultimate restoration. Israel will be gathered back from all over the world. Jeremiah 3:14, 31 verse 10, 32 verse 37 through 43. God will appoint leaders after his own heart. Jeremiah 3:15. Palestine will once again be filled with the glory of God and the people of God. Jeremiah 3 verse 16 through 18. This will be a far greater event than the original Exodus when God brought them out of Egypt. 16 verse 14 and 15 and 23 verse 7. A righteous branch, the Savior, will occupy King David's throne, ruling with wisdom and justice. Jeremiah 23 verse 5 and 6, chapter 30 verse 21, and chapter 33 verse 17. Jerusalem will be rebuilt and filled with joy and great thanksgiving. Jeremiah 38 verse 18 through 20, 31 verse 4 and verse 7 through 9, verse 12 through 14, verse 23 through 25, and Jeremiah 33 verse 10 through 12. The defeat of Babylon after the 70 years. Jeremiah 25 verse 12 and 27 verse 6. Note, the punishment of Babylon would receive from God as found in Jeremiah 50 through 52 evidently refers not only to the historical judgment in Daniel 5, but also the future judgment in Revelation chapter 18. The capture of Zedekiah. Jeremiah 21 verse 3 through 7, chapter 34 verse 1 through 5, and chapter 37 verse 17. See also chapter 39 verse 4 through 7, chapter 52 verse 6 through 11 for fulfillment. The kindly treatment of the godly exiles in Babylon. Jeremiah 24 verse 1 through 7. The new covenant of Jeremiah. The nature of the new covenant. Jeremiah 31, verse 31 through 34. It would embrace the entire house of Israel. It would be totally unlike the Mosaic covenant. God would inscribe his laws upon their hearts. Israel had always suffered with self-inflicted spiritual heart trouble. Note the divine diagnosis. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with the point of a diamond. It is engraved upon the tablets of their hearts. Jeremiah 17 verse 1. But under the new covenant, the heavenly physician would offer them perfect and guaranteed successful heart transplants. This nation with the new hearts would then once again become God's people and he their God. The time of the new covenant, it will go into effect after those days. Jeremiah 31 verse 33, and following the time of Jacob's trouble. Jeremiah 30 verse 7. Both these terms refer to the Great Tribulation. Thus, the new covenant will begin to function after the time of Jacob's trouble at the start of the glorious millennium. The superiority of the new covenant. It will be immutable, unconditional, and eternal, as opposed to the Mosaic covenant in Exodus 19, verse 5 through 8. Merrill F. Unger writes, "The Old Covenant was the law covenant grounded in legal observance. The New Covenant, in Hebrews 8, verse 8 through 12, will be entirely on the basis of grace and the sacrificial blood of Christ, which will be the foundation of Israel's future inward regeneration and restoration to God's favor. Israel's entering into the blessings of the New Covenant, Romans 11, verse 1 through 26, will ensure her being an everlasting nation." Unger's Bible Dictionary, page 352. God himself assures Israel of the duration of this new covenant, where he declares, "If the heaven above can be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off all the seed of Israel." Jeremiah 31, verse 37. See also chapter 33, verse 20 through 26. The mediator of the new covenant, the son of David himself, Jeremiah 33, verse 15 through 18, and chapter 30, verse 9. Classic passages in Jeremiah. They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, "Peace, peace," when there is no peace. Jeremiah 6:14. "Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord." 7, verse 11. "The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is not the health of the daughter of my people recovered?" Jeremiah 8, verse 20 and 22. "Who would not fear thee, O King of nations? For to thee doth it appertain, forasmuch as among all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like unto thee. He hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion." Jeremiah 10, verse 7 and verse 12. "But I was like a lamb or an ox that is brought to the slaughter, and I knew not that they had devised devices against me, saying, Let us destroy the tree with the fruit thereof, and let us cut him off from the land of the living, that his name may be no more remembered." Jeremiah 11, verse 19. "Can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spots? Then may ye also do good that are accustomed to do evil." Jeremiah 13:23. "Then said the Lord unto me, Though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my mind could not be toward this people. Cast them out of my sight, and let them go forth. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me a joy and rejoicing of my heart. For I am called by thy name, O Lord God of hosts." Jeremiah 15, verse 1 and verse 16. "Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be said, The Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but the Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands whither he had driven them. And I will bring them again into their land that I gave unto their fathers." Jeremiah 16, verse 14 and 15. "Thus saith the Lord, Cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord. For he shall be like the heath in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land, and not inhabited. Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, and that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither shall cease from yielding fruit. The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways, and according to the fruit of his doings." Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 5 through 10. "The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will cause thee to hear my words. Then I went down to the potter's house, and behold, he wrought a work on the wheels, and the vessel that he had made of clay was marred in the hand of the potter, so he made it again another vessel, as seemed good to the potter to make it. Then the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as this potter, saith the Lord? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O ye house of Israel." Jeremiah 18, verse 1 through 6. O Lord, thou hast deceived me, and I was deceived. Thou art stronger than I, and hast prevailed. I am in derision daily. Every one mocketh me, for since I spake, I cried out. I cried violence and spoil, because the word of the Lord was made a reproach unto me, and a derision daily. Then I said, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more in his name. But his word was in my heart as a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I was weary with forbearing, and I could not stay. Jeremiah 20, verse 7 through 9. Sing unto the Lord, praise ye the Lord, for he hath delivered the soul of the poor from the hand of evildoers. Cursed be the day wherein I was born. Let not the day wherein my mother bare me be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought tidings to my father, saying, A man-child is born unto thee, making him very glad. Jeremiah 20, verse 13 through 15. And unto this people thou shalt say, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. Jeremiah 21, verse 8. Is not my word as a fire, saith the Lord, and like a hammer that breaketh the rock in pieces? Jeremiah 23, verse 29. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you, and ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. And I will be found of you, saith the Lord, and I will turn away your captivity, and I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places whither I have driven you, saith the Lord, and I will bring you again into the place whence I caused you to be carried away captive. Jeremiah 29, verse 11 through 14. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Jeremiah 30, verse 7. The Lord hath prepared of me unto old, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore with loving kindness have I drawn thee. Behold, I will bring them from the north country, and gather them from the coast of the earth, and will with them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and her that travaileth with child together. A great company shall return thither. They shall come with weeping, and with supplications will I lead them, and I will cause them to walk by the rivers of water in a straight way, wherein they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Thus saith the Lord, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children, refused to be comforted for her children, because they were not. How long wilt thou go about, O thou backsliding daughter? For the Lord hath created a new thing in the earth. A woman shall compass a man. Jeremiah 31, verse 3, verse 8, verse 9, verse 15, verse 22. Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth by thy great power and stretched out arm, and there is nothing too hard for thee. Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? Jeremiah 32, verse 17 and verse 27. Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me. Jeremiah 33, verse 3 and verse 22. But fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, and be not dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save thee from far off, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return and be in rest and at ease, and none shall make him afraid. Jeremiah 45, verse 27. O thou sword of the Lord, how long will it be ere thou be quiet? Put up thyself into thy scabbard, rest and be still. Jeremiah 47, verse 6. The Book of Lamentations, 586 BC. This book is composed of 5 elegies, all of them lamenting the tragic destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. It's written by Jeremiah also. The literary form is alphabetical, somewhat like Psalm 119. A different Hebrew letter of the alphabet begins each of the 22 verses in chapters 1 and 2. In chapter 3 there are 66 verses arranged in 22 groups of 3 verses, each of which in succession begins with a different letter. Tradition says Jeremiah sat weeping outside Jerusalem's north wall under the knoll called called Golgotha, where our Lord was later to die. J. Vernon McGee writes, "The book is filled with tears and sorrow. It is a pageant of pain, a poem of pity, a proverb of pathos, a hymn of heartbreak, a psalm of sadness, a symphony of sorrow. It is the wailing wall of the Bible." Briefing the Bible, page 232. The propagation against God. Lamentations 1. Around 1000 BC, David had established his capital in Jerusalem in 2 Samuel chapter 6. Thus God had blessed this beloved city for nearly 400 years. He had allowed the northern kingdom to be carried away by the Assyrians in 721 BC, but Jerusalem had been spared for another 115 years. All this mercy and long-suffering, however, had been in vain, for Judah continued provoking the Holy One of Israel through her constant sinning. The end had now come. Note the following verses of indictment. Lamentations 1, verse 1. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations and princess among the provinces, how is she become tributary? Chapter 1, verse 3. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest. All of her persecutors overtook her between the straits. Chapter 1, verse 8 of Lamentation. Jerusalem hath previously sinned, therefore she is removed. All that honored her despise her, because they have seen her nakedness. Yea, she sigheth, and then turneth backward. Chapter 1, verse 9. Her filthiness is in her skirts. She remembered not her last end, therefore she came down wonderfully. She had no comforter, O Lord. Behold my affliction, for the enemy hath magnified himself. Chapter 1, verse 17. Zion spreadeth forth her hands, and there is none to comfort her. The Lord hath commanded concerning Jacob that his adversary should be round about him. Jerusalem is as a menstruous woman among them. The punishment from God. Number 2. Lamentations chapter 2. He had destroyed every home in Judah. Chapter 2, verse 2. Every fortress and every wall was broken. He bent his bow of judgment across the land. Chapter 2, verse 4. He allowed his own temple to fall as though it were a booth of leaves and branches in a garden. Chapter 2, verse 6. Judah's enemies were given full freedom to ridicule and destroy her citizens. Chapter 2, verse 16. Her people, old and young alike, choked the streets of Jerusalem with their lifeless bodies. Chapter 2, verse 21. Number 3, chapter 3 of Lamentations. The prophet of God. The tears of Jeremiah fell like a spring ran over the destruction of Jerusalem, like a spring rain for his suffering people. The afflictions of the prophet. All through Lamentations, Jeremiah shares the agony of his soul with us, as the following verses bring out. Jeremiah 1 and verse 12. Is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by? Behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow, which is done unto me, wherewith the Lord hath afflicted me in the day of his fierce anger. Chapter 1, verse 16. For these things I weep, and my eye runneth down with water, because the Comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. My children are desolate, because the enemy prevail. Chapter 2, verse 11. My eyes do fail with tears, my bowels are troubled, my liver is poured upon the earth for the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and the sucklings swoon in the streets of the city. Chapter 3, verse 1 through 19, Jeremiah then relates the sufferings he endured at the hands of his own countrymen, even prior to the Babylonian invasion. Chapter 3, verse 52 through 66. The assurance of the prophet. In the midst of the terrible storm, there shines a ray of reassurance. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul, therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth, for the Lord will not cast off forever. But though he cause grief, yet will he have compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. For he doth not afflict willingly, nor grieve the children of men. Chapter 3, verse 21 through 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 31 through 33. The advice of the prophet, Lamentations 3, verse 40 and 41. Let us search and try our ways, and turn again to the Lord. Let us lift up our heart with our hands unto the God of heaven, in the heavens. The people of God, Lamentations chapter 4. The children's tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths for thirst, Lamentations 4, verse 4. The cream of Judah's youth were treated as earth-wearing pots. Chapter 4, verse 2. See also 5, verse 13. The rich and pampered were in the streets begging for bread. Chapter 4, verse 5. Their mighty princes, once lean and tan, were now but skin and bones, and their faces black as soot. 4, verse 7 and 8. See also 5, verse 12. Tender-hearted women had cooked and eaten their own children. Chapter 4, verse 10. False prophets and priests were blindly staggering through the streets covered with blood. Lamentations 4, verse 14. The king himself, Zedekiah, had been captured, blinded, and carried off into captivity. 4, verse 20. The prayer to God in Lamentations chapter 5. Jeremiah's prayer contained 4 elements. That of remembrance. Remember, O Lord, what has come upon us. Consider and behold our reproach. 5, verse 1. That of repentance. The crown is fallen from our head. Woe unto us that we have sinned. 5:16. That of recognition. Thou, O Lord, remainest forever, thy throne from generation to generation. 5, verse 19. That of renewal. Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old. Chapter 5, verse 21. We're entering a new stage. We won't have much time on this particular tape for this stage, but this is a new stage, and we're going to get into as much of it as we can. It's called the captivity stage. We're still in the dispensation of law. Introducing the captivity stage, Psalm 137 describes the beginning of this period, while Psalms 126 describes the end. Israel is cured of the sin of idolatry while in the city of idolatry. 2 eyewitnesses write of this era. One was a prime minister, the other a priest. This historical period includes 3 men who wouldn't bend or burn in Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A review of Babylon's greatest king, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 1 through 4. And a preview of Greece's greatest king, Alexander the Great, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 6, 8, verse 5 through 8, verse 21, 22, and chapter 11, verse 3 and 4. A fight between a Persian ram and a Greek goat, Daniel chapter 8. An aimless hand of God that wrote, and a lifeless band of men that walked, Daniel chapter 5, and Belshazzar's writing on the wall, and Ezekiel chapter 37, the valley of dry bones. Description of Jesus in the Bible, Daniel chapter 7, verse 9 through 14. Great prophecies revealed through the falling of a stone, Daniel chapter 2, and the felling of a tree in Daniel chapter 4. The second of 3 attempts to consolidate religion around an image, Genesis 11 at the Tower of Babel, Daniel 3 at the great golden image of Nebuchadnezzar on the plain, Revelation chapter 13, the religion of the image of the Antichrist. The real story comes when the bear comes over the mountain in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 concerning Armageddon. The future and final earthly temple, Ezekiel 40 through 48. God blesses a basic diet and curses a blasphemous feast, Daniel chapter 1, where they just lentils and pulse for a few days, and then Daniel chapter 5, where Belshazzar had his great feast, and then the writing came on the wall. Both archangels, Gabriel and Michael, are referred to during this period in Daniel chapter 8 and also chapter 12. This era has more to say about the ministry of the heavenly cherubim than any other period. Ezekiel chapter 1 and chapter 10, which is a very, very interesting subject indeed. This era has more to say about the ministry of the hellish Antichrist than any other period. Daniel chapter 7, chapter 9, chapter 8, and chapter 11. Ezekiel denounces the materialistic city of Tyre, chapter 26, and describes the millennial city of God in chapter 48. Ezekiel begins by describing the removal of God's glory cloud, Ezekiel chapter 10 verse 18, and concludes by predicting the return of this glory cloud in Ezekiel chapter 43 verse 2. The captivity stage, Ezekiel, around 597 BC. Introduction. Ezekiel was the son of a Zadok priest. He was deported to Babylon in 597 BC with King Jehoiachin. His wife died the day the siege began in 588 BC, Ezekiel chapter 24 verse 1 and verse 15 through 18. He was 30 when he began writing and resided at a town on the Kibar, a canal which flowed from the Euphrates River. His ministry was twofold: to remind the exiles of their sin and to encourage them concerning God's future blessings. Ezekiel may be compared with other Old Testament books as follows. Isaiah speaks of God's salvation. Jeremiah speaks of God's judgment. Daniel speaks of God's kingdom, and Ezekiel speaks of God's glory. The sanctification of the man of God, Ezekiel chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 33. Ezekiel sees a vision of the living creatures in chapter 1, verse 1 through 28. The description of these creatures, see chapter 1, verse 4 through 28. The identity of these living creatures, who are they? These magnificent beings are identified later by Ezekiel in chapter 10, verse 20 as the cherubim, angels of high-ranking order. They make their appearance on 3 distinct occasions in the Word of God. In the Garden of Eden to keep Adam from the tree of life after his sin in Genesis 3, verse 22 through 24. To Ezekiel here in Babylon, in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4 through 28. In heaven during John's vision, Revelation 4, verse 6 to 8. The duties of these living creatures to guard and vindicate the righteousness of God. Genesis 3, verse 24, Exodus 26, verse 1, and 36, verse 8, and 35. To symbolize the mercy of God, Exodus 25, verse 22, and 37, verse 9. To aid in administration of the government of God in 1 Samuel 4, verse 4, Psalms 80, verse 1, 99, verse 1, and Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 22, and verse 26. To be eternal reminders of the blessed earthly ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is seen by the following summary of the 4 gospel accounts. Matthew, writing to the Jews, pictures Christ as a lion, the Messiah. Mark, writing to the Romans, pictures Christ as an ox, the servant. Luke, writing to the Greeks, pictures Christ as the perfect man. John, writing to the whole world, pictures Christ as the eagle, the mighty God. For a description of another kind of special angelic beings called the seraphim, see Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1 through 7. Ezekiel hears the voice of the living God in chapter 2, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 27, and chapter 33, verse 1 through 22. He was commissioned as Israel's watchman in Babylon. He was to warn the wicked that if they abandoned their wicked ways, God would not physically destroy them. He was to warn the righteous that if they abandoned their righteous ways, God would destroy them. He was to do all this without fear or favor. He was to totally absorb the message of God. Ezekiel 3, verse 1 and 2. See also Revelation chapter 10, verse 8 through 11. The desolation of the city of God, Jerusalem, chapter 4 through chapter 24. There were 3 distinct phases in the Babylonian captivity and the siege of Jerusalem in 605 BC. At this time, Daniel and other individuals of noble birth were carried away. Daniel 1, verse 3 and verse 4, and 2 Chronicles 36, verse 6 and 7. In 597 BC, during this phase, both King Jehoiachin and Ezekiel, along with many others, were taken into Babylon. 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 10 through 16. Then in 586 BC, at this final time, Judah's last king, Zedekiah, was carried away. The walls of Jerusalem were destroyed, and both temple and city were burned. 2 Kings 25, verse 1 through 7. The events recorded here in Ezekiel chapter 4 through 24 took place between the second and third phase. Apparently, there were false prophets both in Jerusalem and in Babylon who brazenly assured the Jews that God would not dare destroy his own city, even though it had already suffered 2 bitter sieges. But Ezekiel knew otherwise, and he attempted through symbols, parables, visions, and messages to warn all the holy city that the holy city would indeed suffer desolation and destruction. Ezekiel's 12 symbolic acts. He drew a map of Jerusalem on a large tablet of soft clay, showing siege mounds being built around the city. He then added more details portraying the enemy camps around it and placement of the battering rams. He finally placed an iron plate between the map and himself. This was to indicate the impenetrable wall of the Babylonian army and also to show the impossibility of escape. Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 1 through 3. He lay on his left side a few hours each day for 390 days to symbolize the iniquity of the northern kingdom. Each day was to represent a year. Chapter 4, verse 4 and 5 of Ezekiel. He then lay on his right side a few hours each day for 40 days to depict the iniquity of Judah, the southern kingdom. Again, each day was to represent a year. Chapter 4, verse 6. It must be admitted that the full meaning of these time periods could not be known. Now, I want to read you something here on page 809 of Dr. Francis Jennings Dake concerning this. The 40 years were to be part of the 390 years, and both periods were to end with the fall of Judah and Jerusalem. The 40 years would take us back to the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, the year that Jeremiah began making the predictions in Palestine regarding the coming judgment on Judah and Jerusalem. Jeremiah 1 verse 1. Subtracting the 13 years from Josiah's 31-year reign would leave 18 years of his rule extending into the 40-year period. Excluding the 3-month reign each of Jehoahaz and Jehoiachin, the 40 years would be made up as in the following, ending with the destruction of the city of Jerusalem as predicted in verse 1 through 3, 7 through 8, and 16 and 17. The 40 years made up years of Josiah's reign. Jeremiah 1 verse 2 and 2 Kings 22 verse 1 was 18. Jehoiakim's reign, 2 Kings 23 verse 36, 11 years. Zedekiah's reign, 2 Kings 24 verse 18 was 11 years, and the total years were 40. The 40 years of iniquity of Israel. The iniquity of the house of Israel must refer to all Israel and not to any one portion only, whereas the particular mention of Judah bearing the iniquity 40 years in verse 6 must refer to all of Israel represented by the kingdom of Judah after the 10 tribes have been destroyed. The two terms, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, are used interchangeably throughout of the one people. While the two kingdoms existed, they were recognized as all of Israel, but after the captivity of the 10 tribes of Judah, including people from all the 12 tribes and Levi who became a part of Judah, were considered representing all Israel. In prophesying to the captives of Judah, Ezekiel used the term Israel of these Jews 185 times, and Jeremiah, who prophesied at the same time, used it 126 times, referring to them. Jeremiah used the term Judah 185 times of the same Jews, but Ezekiel only used it 15 times. There were two houses of Israel during most of the 390 years of verse 5, and even after the 10 tribes were taken captive, they continued to bear their iniquity to the time of the other house, Judah, also bore same iniquity. At the same time, Judah is singled out as bearing a special 40 years of iniquity because of committing greater sins than the 10 tribes during this additional period, 40 years. For this, they will also finally taken captive. We'll continue our study later.